So, dihybrid crosses, like we did yesterday. We were making an assumption when we were doing those crosses that the genes we were looking at were on different chromosomes. What I mean is, remember how I said if you were like big A, big B, little b, that you could make, and we went through all the possible combinations, that you could get big A with big B, big A with little b, little a with big B, little a with little b. We called that independent assortment. The idea that it's completely random which copy of A and which copy of B you give. But we were assuming, if you were to visualize this going back to your favorite chapter of meiosis, we were basically making the assumption that like big A and little a were on one set of chromosomes, and big B and little b were on a different set of chromosomes, and that's why you could get any combination of A's and B's. But since every chromosome carries 1,000 or more traits, it's very possible that you could be looking at two traits that are on the same chromosome. In other words, A and B are like this. Big A and big B are carried together on this chromosome, and little a and little b are together on this chromosome. If two or more genes are carried on the same chromosome, those two genes are said to be linked. They will not sort independently, because if you look at this, if this goes through meiosis, there's only two options. They can either give both big A and big B together because they're stuck together, and little a and little b. You can't get the other possibilities. Now, for the purposes of this chapter, you will not have to solve any kind of genetic problems that involve linked genes. We're going to talk about it more in the next chapter. All you have to know is the definition for this chapter. So linked genes are those that are carried on the same chromosome, and they tend to be inherited together. Now, here's the thing though. They are not always 100% of the time inherited together, because what did we learn about that would allow these to switch? Crossing over. So linked genes are on the same chromosome, and they usually are inherited together, but you will see, even if they are on the same chromosome, small numbers of offspring that have the new combination, and that's due to crossing over. Again, you will not be tested on how to do a cross with linked genes or how to determine if genes are linked or not on this test. In the next chapter, next week, you will learn more about how to look at the results of a cross and determine if genes are on the same chromosome or not. For this chapter, just know the definition. So linked genes are on the same chromosome. They tend to be inherited together. You may see small numbers of offspring that have the other combination due to crossing over, but most of the offspring will inherit the two genes as a package deal, and they will look like one of the parents. So this will come back next chapter. All right, we're going to skip this next thing here because we already did it. This is just this slide's just explaining that there's some situations where genes don't follow Mendel's laws. I don't think there's anything to write. The first situation is incomplete and codominance, which we talked about yesterday. Incomplete dominance was where you cross like red and white flowers and the offspring you get are pink. And codominance was like the Roan cow, where you cross brown and white and you get speckles of brown and white. What would you get in a Roan cow if it showed incomplete dominance instead of codominance? Right, you'd get a cow that was like tan or light brown. You'd get a color in between. So codominance, you see both at the same time. Incomplete dominance, you see something in the middle. We did a couple practice problems with this. All right, so that brings us to the rest of the stuff for today. You don't have to know anything about retrievers, but I wanted to show you this example because some traits are more complex than just being controlled by one gene. For example, you might think, and probably scientists originally thought, that black labs, brown labs, and golden labs was one gene. In other words, you could have thought that big B would make a black lab, little b was a yellow lab, and then big B, little b was brown. But when scientists went and did crosses, they found the cross didn't match up with that. And so they discovered that this is a good example of a trait that's actually not controlled by one gene. It's controlled by two genes. So if the retriever is big B anything, big E anything, and by the way, little dashes mean that this could be capital or lowercase. It is a very common way of representing that the second letter doesn't matter. So if you see big B dash, big E dash, or something with a dash, it means the second letter could be capital or lowercase. It doesn't matter what the second letter is. Anyway, if they have at least one capital B and one capital E, they're black. If they're all lowercase, they're yellow. But the way that we get chocolate labs is, oops, no, here. If the little b's are little, but they have at least one capital E, the lab comes out as a chocolate lab. Again, I'm not concerned that you memorize anything about Labrador retrievers. All I'm trying to show you here is that sometimes a trait is more complicated and it doesn't come out the way we expect, and it's because it's not controlled by one gene. And I actually do have a practice problem like this at the end, the very last question I think it is, at the end of the lecture is on parakeets. Parakeets are kind of like this. There's two genes. If they have capital letters for both of the genes, they're green. If they have capital for the first but lowercase for the second, they're blue. And if they have lowercase for the first and capital for the second, they're yellow. And if they have all lowercase letters, they're white. So that's how you get the four colors of parakeets. So you'll see a practice problem like that coming up later. Here's another example, eye color. It's not just one gene. It's not just incomplete dominance where you have brown, blue, and green. There's all shades of brown and all shades of blues and all shades of greens and hazels because it's controlled by the interaction of multiple genes. So that's where some traits just don't fit what Mendel said. I like this one. This is kind of cool. This is chickens. So the thing on their head is called a comb. The shape of the comb on their head is actually determined by two genes. If they have capital R's and lowercase p's, then they look like this. They get this very ugly thing. If they have lowercase r's and capital P's, they get this, which is a little better looking. And then if they have, I believe this one is walnut, is this. Capital R and capital P, they get this very small one, but the cool one is this one. If they're all little, they have this one. So it's the combination of two genes, and there's actually 4 different phenotypes that you can see. So again, nothing where you have to memorize this trait, just to show you some examples. All right, this you do need to know, polygenic inheritance. So a lot of traits that are seen on a continuum. In other words, skin color and height are 2 good examples of this. We don't just see people that are tall, medium, and short. What we see is a whole continuum of people that go from really, really tall to most people kind of fall in the middle and then really, really short. This is a textbook example of what's called polygenic inheritance. In fact, this is the exact question on your test because I was making your test. You will see a bell curve, and it will say what kind of traits usually show a bell curve like this in nature. The answer is polygenic traits, polygenic inheritance. Here's what happens with polygenic inheritance. You have several genes, and they all code for making more and more and more of the same thing. So let's think about, for example, skin color. If skin color was determined by just 3 genes, and the more capital letters you have, the darker you are, this would be the lightest possible person a person could be, and this would be the darkest a person could possibly be. If I cross these 2 people, everybody's going to come out right in the middle, medium. But think about all the shades in between. In other words, you could have all capital letters except for 1, and this one would be slightly lighter than this person. And this person would be the same color because they also have all capital letters except 1. In other words, if you literally just count how many capital letters, the more capital letters, the darker you are. So if you cross 2 people who were medium skin tone, and it was just controlled by 3 genes, these are all the different skin tones you could get. It would be possible for these 2 parents to have 2 kids, this parent with this parent, both of them have medium skin, to have a child that was super, super dark, way darker than either of them, and have a child that was super, super, super light, way lighter than either of them. But the chances are rare. Most of the time, their kids are probably going to come out somewhere in here, somewhere in the medium range, similar to their parents. But this could also explain why you could have 2 medium parents that have a child that's like way more tan than them. It's not because that's not their parents. It's because they could be heterozygous. And there's so many possible combinations. The more capital letters you happen to get, these 2 parents could have a really dark kid or a really light kid. You could have a brother and a sister, and one of them's very fair-skinned and one of them's very dark-skinned from the same 2 parents that have a medium skin tone. Here's I think a really great visual of what I mean about the bell curve. This is height. So height's the same way. The more capital letters you have, and it's controlled by several genes, the taller you are. Most people are probably going to fall in the middle. So here's this guy here who's 5'3", and this guy all the way over here who's 6'5", in this random sampling of people. But most people, the most average height for the guys was 5'10". But most people fell somewhere in the middle, because there's way more combinations that give you a height in the middle than to have all capital letters or all lowercase letters. And this is the girls in this particular population. It looks like 5'6" was the most, although obviously it's kind of spread. 4'11" was the shortest girl. 5'11" was the tallest girl in this population. So a bell curve is usually seen for polygenic inheritance, where the more capital letters you have, the taller you are or the darker you are. Skin color and height are the two textbook examples of polygenic inheritance, although I'm sure they're not the only ones that we could come up with. All right. This is another trait, another thing that you can see in genetics. It's called Pleiotropy. I know this word is not in your outline. You should add it, and it's not in the copy of the PowerPoint you have, but you should add it. I added it to the Quizlet. Pleiotropy is where one gene affects multiple traits, and that we actually see this a lot. We're thinking of a gene controlling just one thing. You know, this gene makes the flowers red. Sometimes, though, a gene controls something that controls many aspects of what you look like. So this example, the Manx cat, it doesn't just control the development of the tail. Capital M has a normal tail, and little m is a Manx cat. But the thing about the Manx cat is that this gene doesn't just control tail development, it controls the development of the entire backbone. So something like 80% of these kittens die because their backbone doesn't develop right. So the gene doesn't just make them have no tail. The gene controls several aspects of the development of their backbone, including the tail. And so you're seeing one gene that affects multiple traits. Another good example of this is achondroplasia. Achondroplasia is probably the most common type of dwarfism. Let me show you. Skip this thing with the mice. Here. So, normal height. If you have normal height, which everybody in here does, you are little d, little d. Achondroplasia is actually a dominant trait. So, if you've ever seen Little People, Big World, these two parents both have achondroplasia. They are big D, little d. The reason I know that they are big D, little d is because big D results in a miscarriage. No child survives. You have to get at least one copy of the normal chromosome to survive. Why? Because it doesn't just make you short. The gene controls a whole bunch of aspects of your development. One of the outer signs you see is their short stature, but that's not the only thing the gene controls. So because the gene controls multiple things, if you don't get at least one good copy, you actually won't survive. So when these guys have kids, you'll notice three of their 4 children, and I don't know if she had any miscarriages. I never watched the show. It's not on anymore. But 3 of their children are actually normal height. These 3 kids are all normal height. Technically, that was only a 1 in 4 chance. But 3 of their 4 children are normal height, and they have 1 child. Oh, he's not that, though. That would have been a miscarriage. Sorry. They had a 50% chance of having a child that carried achondroplasia. In theory, you might say, well, somebody asked me actually earlier today, they said, would these kids have a higher chance of having a child with achondroplasia? And the answer is no, because they don't carry it. They're little g, just like everybody else in this room. Is it possible for 2 normal parents to have a child with achondroplasia? Yes, it is, because it's a mutation. So if you have 2 normal parents that don't have it, they're not carrying it. It's a dominant trait. You don't carry it and not show it. But it's a spontaneous mutation on chromosome number 4. I wouldn't say it's super common, but it's kind of common enough that we know that it happens. So you could have 2 normal parents that have a child with achondroplasia. It would not make those parents any more likely to have another child with it. It's rare. It would be very unlikely, but it is possible. But that is the only way. If they're normal height, they don't have any higher risk of having a child with it than anybody else in this room. If you already have it, then yes, because you're carrying a copy, so you have a 50% chance of passing it on. So again, this is another example of a trait that it's one gene, but it controls multiple aspects of development, multiple characteristics. One other comment about dominant. I know, a lot of people assume that dominant means common. A